Alright, hello guys, and this is another video here. Now some of you watching this may start getting a feeling of deja vu. That is because I am going over some things that I've done in an earlier video that was an update on my Socket 423 machine. This video I think is going to kind of make that one unnecessary. I don't want a whole bunch of clutter on my channel with videos on this machine. So I think having 3 videos is a bit much on it. So after I upload this one, I'm probably going to delete that one. But there's some stuff in that video that I think is important. So I'm just going to stick that stuff at the beginning of this video, and then I'm going to get to the new stuff, which is very, very important. I actually even considered just taking down my original video and doing this all over again, but I think I'm just going to do it this way, where I'm going to keep that one up, and I'm going to lead people over to this new update video. So first things first, let me go over the stuff that was in the second video that I want to put into this one. And that is, there were some mistakes in that video. Well, there's a lot of mistakes in that video, which we'll get to. But the first one is, in that video I did say that the only machines that used RDRAM were these early Pentium 4s. That wasn't true. I found out later that there were some late Pentium 3 machines that used RDRAM. Those were mostly like workstations and servers and things like that. So there are some Pentium 3 motherboards that did use RDRAM. RDRAM didn't really suit those boards too well, though. They really was more tuned for Pentium 4, but we'll talk about that later. Another thing is, when I made that machine, I made it a year 2000, 2001 build. The video drivers I used, though, I forgot to mention, were a little bit later. I think they were from 2004. Not a big deal. Shouldn't really affect things very much at all. It's just I originally had some trouble with earlier video drivers. It was giving DirectX errors, and I could have worked it out, but I was just being lazy, and I said screw it, and I used some later drivers that just worked. So that's the other thing. The last thing is I forgot to mention really SSE2 instruction sets, which were new in the Pentium 4, and I just forgot to mention that, of course, later games are going to take advantage of SSE2 that are in games were later going to be optimized for the Pentium 4. So a lot of the early games I tested and early games we were looking at, they obviously were not optimized for the Pentium 4. So just keep that in mind, that later games you're going to have SSE2 instructions, and which the Pentium 4 can take advantage of, and it's going to be more optimized for that. So again, I just wanted to stress this build was only looking at the Pentium 4 from the view of the year 2000 or 2001. So we weren't looking at later Pentium 4s or the performance of those. We also weren't looking at making a year 2000 machine and then, you know, how it works in the year 2004 or 5. And the last thing I wanted to make sure is clear, I was not looking at CPU versus CPU. Even though the title of the video that was in there, Pentium 4 versus Pentium 3, I was not looking at the CPUs alone. So it wasn't directly comparing a Pentium 4 to a Pentium 3. In that case, I wouldn't have gone with like a theme machine. I would have just used a really powerful components, like powerful video card and stuff, to get rid of any bottlenecks so we could just look at CPU performance. That wasn't the point of the video. I was looking at a Pentium 4 build from 2000, 2001 compared to a Pentium 3 build from 2000, 2001. So we're taking in consideration things like video card, sound card, all that stuff. So when I ran the benchmarks and when I reran the benchmarks, which we'll talk about in a minute, I was using the video card. I wasn't, you know, at benchmarks I was not picking software render. I was picking with 3D acceleration because we were looking at the video card as well as the CPU. And I also ran those benchmarks with sound enabled. Now usually when you're benchmarking CPUs, you want to disable sound. So you're just looking at that CPU performance. I didn't do that. I ran them all with sound where I could because, again, we were looking at the machines as a whole. Alright, so there is the old material. So now I want to get on to the point of me making this video now. And I'll just come right out and say it. I was completely wrong. I made a very big omission. I apologize for that. I hope it didn't, you know, lead people astray. I know this isn't like world-changing subject matter here. I know I'm not influencing millions of people, but I don't like putting out incorrect information. And usually when it's brought to my attention, you know, I will double check it. I will try to correct it. Unfortunately with YouTube, with videos, it's hard to edit things. There are cards and stuff, and you can put things in the description, but I really used to like the oh man, I forget what they called them, but it let you annotations. I know they didn't work on mobile devices, but annotations were a good way, in my opinion, to make edits and corrections to old videos. Unfortunately, I can't do that anymore. On my blog, it's really easy. I just change the blog, but the videos, it's a little bit harder to make big corrections. So that is why I'm making this video. So anyways, the big mistake I made, the big omission, is I failed to update chipset drivers with the Pentium 3 and the Pentium 4 when I did this project. It completely, I just completely forgot. In my defense, not video drivers, but chipset drivers can be hard to, sometimes you just don't remember because the machine will run supposedly, I mean seemingly fine without updating the drivers when you install your OS. It has its own thing. Even like, you know, with video drivers, when you install your OS, like Windows will install generic VGA drivers, but it's very obvious. You're really limited with colors and stuff, and oh, my video drivers. Chipset drivers, sometimes you'll get things that will have like the conflicts or errors in Device Manager, but a lot of times, like in this case, it just, everything looks fine, it runs okay. But in this case, installing chipset drivers for your chipsets, especially with this Pentium 4, makes a really big difference. Actually, it changes everything. And I was pretty adamant in my last video that the Pentium 3 was indeed faster than the early Pentium 4. I was completely wrong. We'll see that in a minute with the benchmarks. The Pentium 4 machine was not optimized. So to that one individual in my comments that stood up for the Pentium 4, because he was like the only one that actually stood up for the Pentium 4, you were right, man. You were right. And again, also, while we're talking, a big shout out and thanks to Phil's Computer Lab, although he doesn't really need a shout out from me, but I do want to give credit where credit's due. He really did help put me on the right path to figuring out what the problem was with talking with him. And thank you for letting me, you know, compare numbers and whatnot, and putting me on the path to figuring out what the issue was with my Pentium 4 machine. So yeah, I forgot chipset drivers, and that changes everything. Actually, it flips things a little bit. So let's take a look at the results. Let's see how the benchmarks differ here now with chipset drivers installed in both machines. Other than that, I'm running everything exactly the same. I'm still running it at the kind of high resolution of 1024 by 768, 32-bit colors. But that, using, you know, same video drivers, same sound card, video card, all that good stuff. So if you didn't see the original video for this, I really encourage you to go watch it, at least the first part of it, where I just go over the machine and its components. So you know what's inside this thing and what's going on. So let's look at those new benchmark numbers now that we have corrected it and optimized both machines. Alright, so here we go with the new benchmarks, now with the chipset drivers installed, and we'll start off with the two synthetic benchmarks, 3D Mark 2000 and 3D Mark 2001 SE. Good old standbys I like to use. Remember, these are all running lowest detail settings at 1024 by 768 with 32-bit color, and it's a complete reversal pretty much of what we saw before, where we have the Pentium 4 now kind of, not too much, but it's inching out performance-wise over the Pentium 3. It's not by too much, couple hundred marks in 3D Mark 2000, but that gap gets a little bit wider in 2001 SE, but there is definitely an advantage in the favor of the Pentium 4 now. Also, it's not up here on this chart, but I did do these tests with a more powerful graphics card, so they weren't year 2000, so it didn't go with the theme, but I used a FX 5950 Ultra, and especially in 3D Mark 2001 SE, it really pulled ahead. I think I was getting like 9,000 marks on there, so a more powerful graphic card makes quite a difference. But here, staying within the confines of our year 2000, early 2001 build, yeah, now that everything is optimized, we do see an advantage with the Pentium 4. And I also like to point out I did update the chipset drivers on the Pentium 3 board as well, so everything, the field has been is equal here, but yeah, we do now have the Pentium 4 pulling ahead of the Pentium 3. Alright, now for the benchmarks we've all been waiting for. Again, these are the game benchmarks. I ran all these games pretty much in default with, of course, 1024 by 768 with 32-bit colors. So these are the new updated benchmarks now with the optimized systems with the chipset drivers installed in both the Pentium 4 rig and the Pentium 3. Now keep in mind, when a benchmark test allowed me to use 3D acceleration like OpenGL with a card rather than software, I did use it because remember, we are benchmarking the systems here as a whole, considering the graphics card and not just the CPU. So we're looking at the systems as a whole. So keep that in mind. Also, since we're looking at the systems as a whole, I did have a Sound Blaster Live installed, and if a benchmark used sound or a loud sound, I allowed it. Alright, so first off, we have some older games. We have GL Quake and Quake II using the OpenGL driver, and we scored exactly the same. A little weird. There must be some kind of limiter or bench, something we're hitting there. But yeah, we scored the same across the board, 120 frames per second there with both systems. Now with Quake III, this is the new one I've added. Things are a little bit different here, and we definitely now see an advantage with the Pentium 4. Pretty noticeable. What is that, like 30 frames plus? It's still above 60, so you're not gonna really notice, but the Pentium 4 does pull ahead. Comanche 4, which is probably the most demanding game on this list, pretty much the same. I think there's like a 1 frame difference, but it is in favor of the Pentium 4, although it is within the margin of error there, so keep that in mind. Again, this is another test I didn't put here, but lowering resolution will probably give you a little bit more advantage to the Pentium 4 here, so and just higher numbers in general, so keep that in mind. Expendable Millennium Soldier, again, the advantage comes out to the Pentium 4, not by too much, but it is definitely noticeable. Serious Sam, again, a very small advantage to the Pentium 4. And MDK2, again, an advantage to the Pentium 4, although it is not massive. What are we looking at? Like 8 or 7 frames difference, but it is there. So yeah, these tests are completely different from the original tests I did, where the Pentium 3 was basically stomping the Pentium 4. Well, not stomping. Okay, it did have an advantage where it's like it's flipped now, where the Pentium 4 has the slight advantage. So yeah, I mean it's completely different now. So I think what we're gonna do now is we're just gonna take a look. I'm gonna just play a couple games, and we'll take a look at those running on this new optimized Pentium 4 rig. See how those games do. Okay, so the first game we're going to look at here is Far Cry. Now, I did the bulk of these tests at 800 by 600 with 32-bit color. Now, a lot of these games would run at 1024 by 768 by 32, but when I ran them at those higher resolutions, they did tend to dip. You can run them at those resolutions, but you will get to tend to get dips more often into the under 30 frames per second. So I just wanted to show these running a little bit more optimally at a resolution that a lot of people would pick if they were getting frame rates under 30 frames per second. Now, with these high action points, we do get some dips under 30, but believe me, it happens a lot less than if we used higher resolutions. Now, performance is actually not so different. This game tended to run really well even before the chipset update and the older video I had. This game still ran perfectly well without the chipset drivers, but it feels like it's running a little bit better now. I'm just getting a little bit higher frame rates on average. It tends to be staying over 30 FPS a little bit more on average than it did before, but it's very, very playable game. And yes, like I said, you can bump up the resolution if you wanted, and it's still pretty much playable, but at 800 by 600 you're going to get a smoother experience. Alright, so this is Quake III now, and yeah, I am running this one at 1024 by 768 with 32-bit color because this machine just tears this game up. You know, I was getting, it says 91 FPS consistently with 800 by 600 by 32, so I decided, hey, I'll try it at the higher resolution, and it's pretty much the same performance here. So yeah, it's even at the higher resolution, this machine just tears up this game. It's buttery smooth. Now, this isn't a game I tried out in my earlier videos, so I can't compare it. But yeah, this has no troubles at all playing Quake III. Alright, so this is Grand Theft Auto 3, and we're running at 800 by 600 with 32-bit color. This is a game that really struggled in my previous video with this machine, with these tests. And I was running it a little bit higher resolution, 1024 by 768-ish resolution. I think it was a little bit off, but it really struggled. And even it bringing down to this resolution here, it was quite playable, but it still wasn't consistent as it is here after the chipset driver update. So after this chipset driver update, yeah, this game is completely playable. You get a pretty consistent 30 FPS. Now you can up the resolution a little bit, and it'll still be more or less playable, but you're going to get a lot more dips down into the 20s. So if you want a much smoother experience, if you just keep it at 800 by 600 by 32, you get a pretty consistent 30 FPS.
Checking out classic music, head down to Bedford Point, where you can see Fanny, Saturday Night Fever. I saw Saturday Night Fever, and did you know those little fellas? They never take.
Alright, so here we have Halo at 800 by 600 with 32-bit color, and this game actually runs fine now. A bit demanding for this system, but after the chipset driver update, this game runs pretty much fine on this Socket 423 system, whereas before the chipset driver update I did, this thing was a train wreck on this system. I mean, the only way you could even get it partially playable was by lowering details and resolution to the absolute lowest, and even then it was an ugly, horrible, choppy mess. But the chipset driver update made a world of difference with this game, and it is completely playable now, as is with the GeForce 2 Ultra, even with all the texture settings on high. Now, this game is also, you can bump up the resolution to 1024 by 768 if you want to, but like I said, you're still going to see a lot more drops into lower frame rates. So you're going to see a lot more drops into the 20s and lower. But it seems like if you keep it at 800 by 600, like I said, like here, you still get it in the 20s, but it's really not that bad, and the whole experience still feels more or less smooth. So, yeah, this game, this is like a night and day difference after updating the chipset drivers.
I've been saving Sector 7 and 8, fall back to secondary defensive position.
What the hell? Did something just hit us? Move in! Back to the airlock! Sorry! Back me up!
Keep your head down. There's 2 of us in here now, remember?
Hey, mate, that was mine! You stole my kill!
Alright, so now that all of that is said and done, what are my final impressions? Has my viewpoint changed on this machine at all? Well, I mean, obviously it has in the fact that, yes, the Pentium 4 properly optimized is indeed faster than a Pentium 3 when you're using the same stuff. Was it worth it? I still don't think it was worth it. At least initially, it seems that the increase in performance is pretty small. I mean, it was bigger. Things like Quake III, you could really tell it was over 10 frames a second difference. But a lot of like older stuff, you're getting over 60 frames per second anyways on a lot of games from that era, whether with a Pentium 4 or a Pentium 3. So, I mean, keep in mind later Pentium 4s are going to do much better. Pentium 3s, they stopped making at some point. Pentium 4s kept going for a while. So remember, we were only looking at the very earliest, in this case, the 1.5 gigahertz Pentium 4. So keep that in mind. But at the time, no, they were real expensive. Of course, a lot of CPUs when they first come out are pretty expensive, but the Intel ones especially. And that Pentium 4 was just pretty pricey. And I think maybe that's where a little bit of the problem came from. There was a performance boost, but it wasn't quite as big as people were expecting. With 500 megahertz was the difference between this and the Pentium 3 I tested. New architecture, I just don't think it gave quite the performance people were expecting. RDRAM, everyone talks shit about RDRAM. I mean, like, people hate RDRAM. But performance-wise, I mean, bandwidth, it was much higher than the SDRAM. I haven't had any problems with it. It's a little weird having to put like dummy slots. Like if you only have 2 sticks and you have 4 slots, you have to put 2 dummy slots. I didn't deal with that, but I mean that's a little inconvenient. Yes, it needs the heat spreader. Yes, it gets really hot. Yes, that may lead to reliability problems. So I guess in that way, that may rub people the wrong way. It was also insanely expensive at the time. Yeah, also DDR came out a little bit later, so it was sort of a dead end, I guess, but it's not, I mean, it does the job. So, I get, like I said, it was super expensive. It probably did have reliability problems because it did get hot, but performance-wise, I read a lot of things, and people kept saying that there were a lot of situations where SDRAM was actually better. I didn't really see that. If anyone would like to give examples of specific occasions where that's the case, please do in the comments. But I haven't seen that as an issue. Yeah, the last thing I guess is socket 423 was abandoned pretty quickly. I think about a year. So that was another thing that, of course, you didn't know at the time. But if you bought a Pentium 4 in 2000, and then you had socket 423, and then a year later they came out with a new socket, and they pretty much mostly dropped support for that socket 423. I would have been pretty pissed. So I guess that might be the biggest thing with these early Pentium 4s is the socket. So it's more of a problem with socket 423 and how quickly it was dropped, and your upgrade path was a little bit difficult then. You could get like adapters if you could find them that let you use Northwoods, but yeah, socket 423 was a dead end. So maybe that was a big issue rather than just the early CPUs alone. But yeah, I think they do perform better, but just not as well as maybe people expected. So yeah, it's kind of my opinion. Still faster than the Pentium 3, but I still don't think it was really worth it at the time. The smart thing would have done to wait a year or so till that socket 478 came out. So I do apologize for the mix-up with everything. I hope this correction video helps some people that maybe watched the first video. I don't like to perpetuate myths and things like that. So again, thanks Phil for putting me on the track there and figuring out it was chipsets drivers. I will not make that mistake twice. So, okay guys. Alright guys, so to wrap this video up completely, I thought we'd do something a little bit different here. And that is, I just want to say the Pentium 4 versus the Pentium 3 is sort of a weird, sort of divisive subject. It's not quite, but almost to the level of like PC versus Mac or Intel versus AMD. People tend to take sides, and it seems generally on the side of anti-Pentium 4. A lot of people really seem to hate the Pentium 4, and then you have a smaller group of people that really kind of stand up for it. But yeah, there's a lot of hate out there for Pentium 4s. Even in my older video with the flawed data, there wasn't a lot of people that came out and stuck up for the Pentium 4. There was one commenter, but most people just sort of accepted the flawed data. I don't know if there's just not a lot of information on the subject, or people just tend to take what I say as absolute truth, which I doubt, or maybe there's a little bit of that bias against the Pentium 4, and people just wanted to see the Pentium 3 beat the Pentium 4, even though that was flawed data at the time. So what we're going to do here, I have a guest speaker for the first time on the channel, and he is Jack, and he is president of the, let me see if I get this right, the FUP4 organization. And he just wants to give a little bit of a rebuttal and give his view on the Pentium 4. So this is just a little extra bonus treat for you Pentium 4 haters out there. So throw you a bone after the reversal of these results. So if you hate the Pentium 4, sit back and enjoy. The views expressed by our guests are not necessarily the views of Ancient Electronics or its staff. We also wish to advise the following may contain harsh language not appropriate for workplaces or small children. If you are in a workplace or have a small child present, please take appropriate measures. Thank you.
So you reran the numbers, eh, Justin? You installed the chipset drivers, and now you're showing that the Pentium 4 is faster than the Pentium 3? Cool. But you're forgetting a couple things. First of all, the Pentium 4 is a giant piece of shit. It's the worst fucking processor that Intel's ever made, that any company has ever made. I would take a G5 Mac over a Pentium 4 any day. I'd take a G4, a G3, I'd take any of the Motorola processors over that Pentium 4. And let me tell you why. Because NetBurst and all of its bullshit was a lie. It was fucking vaporware, man. The Pentium 3, it's the best. It's the best processor of all time. You're still using Pentium 3s. Because after the Pentium 4 was a fucking nightmare disaster, they couldn't even use it in like laptops because it would use up your battery in like 23 minutes. They just abandoned it. They just said, fuck it, let's go back to the Pentium 3. And that's where all your Core series, the Pentium M, everything just went back to the Pentium 3. And that's because the Pentium 4 is like the fucking herpes of the computer industry. Every person I know has some fucking $40 Craigslist Dell that has that piece of shit flappy thing on the front of the case, you know, the little gray flappy thing, and they all have Pentium 4s, and they're like, oh, it's 2.8 gigahertz. Ooh, fuck that. Fuck that. That thing is not 2.8 gigahertz, 2.66 or 3. And don't talk to me about the extremes. Oh, the extremes were pretty good. No, they were garbage too. I mean, the Pentium 4 was so bad that like they had to kill the Pentium name for a couple of years because it was such garbage. Look, all I'm saying is that I would have rather been molested by my uncle than have had my Pentium 4. Fuck that thing.